Right. Cool. So, hey, how are you? Thank you for being here today. So I would like to start with a question. How many of you use open source projects on your day-to-day work, right? Like probably all of you, right? It's completely impossible to be a software developer without actually using an open source project. But how many of you are actively contributing to an open source project? Well, I know that you, Alex, you do, right? So what if I tell you that you can work on the largest projects in the world and learning and working alongside the most brilliant people in our industry? You probably, some people are think that I'm crazy, but open source give you that opportunity and much more. And you would think that the like there is many people contributing on these projects that move the world, but that's completely untrue, right? Java is run in 3 billion devices. There are 20 million Java developers in the world. So guess how many people are building the OpenJDK? Any guess? It's 200 people. So only 200 people are deciding how 20 million developers develop and how 3 billion devices work. And that's the same for any open source project. Open source changed my life when I became a core contributor of Bootstrap, which is one of the largest open source projects related to open source. And I would like today to teach you how you can become an open source developer too. And that's something that might change your life and change your career too. So to start with, I would like to present you or introduce you to 4 people. The first one is Otavio, who is here on the right of this picture. He's one of those 200 OpenJDK developers now, but he was working on a government agency where there was lots of bureaucracy. Nothing moved really, especially in Brazil, right? I don't know how things are here in Germany, but in Brazil, like there is lots of politics, nothing really works. And as he was developing a thing for the government, he started contributing and writing specs for the OpenJDK. That movement ended up getting the attention of Tommy Tribe that hired him. And then now he's a Java champion. He is a multiple-time winner of the JSP award. And that simple thing about contributing to OpenJDK completely changed his career and his life. The person next to him is called Eder. Eder used to work at a consultancy. One of those clients was a bank, and they needed a decision engine. So he went and implemented rules and started contributing to rules. That got the attention of Red Hat, who offered him a job, and now he's a Java champion too, and he's leading one of the rules team. Now, the other 2 people I'd like to introduce to you today is these 2. The first on the right is Bruno. He used to work in a bank 5 years ago, and he's a security engineer. Of course, working in a bank, it wasn't really fun with all the restrictions that are on the banking industry. So he started contributing to a project called Torquebox. That also got the attention of the people from Red Hat, who offered him a job in a small community called AeroGear. Now, he then became, or today, he's a leader of the Keycloak team, which is the security product for Red Hat. And probably my favorite story of the open source is the person beside him, whose name is Daniel. 7 years ago, Daniel is an Android developer, and he started contributing at this small open source project called AeroGear. Now, at one point, the leader of the community, his name is Jay, he saw that 80% of the Android code was written by Daniel. So, of course, he offered him a job. And Daniel rejected it. So Jay was like scratching his head, like, why does a guy that clearly loves a project and works for free is rejecting a well-paid project working for a company like Red Hat, which is pretty cool, and also working remotely? So he asked, and Daniel's answer was that he was rejecting it because he didn't speak English at all, right? He was using Google Translator to participate on this community. So Jay, who isn't dumb at all, he offered him a job anyway. He hired him, and he sent him an English teacher every week to his house for 2 years. Until now, he became the leader eventually of the Android team within Red Hat. And he just a few months ago was hired by Shopify to work in Canada in English, right? So that movement and those contributions actually changed his life. And both Daniel and Bruno were my mentors when I became an open source contributor. So 6 years ago, I was hired by Red Hat to improve the user experience of a small community called AeroGear. Now, as a good designer that I was, I didn't know Git, I didn't know basically anything. So I took the code from GitHub, downloaded, made some changes on the code base, and then zip it and send it to the mailing list. Of course, the community were thinking like, what's this guy doing, right? How can we consume this? It makes no sense. So they were patient enough to teach me how to do Git, to teach me how to interact with the community. Then from there, I went to another project called Patternfly within Red Hat. And nowadays, I'm the leader that of the team that creates dashboard at Auth0. I'm also a core team member of Bootstrap. I'm a contributor to Eclipse Foundation. And also, I wrote some articles for CSS Tricks and List Apart. And since open source changed my life, I would like to tell you how you can do the first steps to get there. So let's first define what open source is. And open source is, before everything else, a community, right? It's basically a group of people that are passionate about something and they get together to solve it or to work on that. And open source needs every single one of you. Historically, code and developers are mainly like the most obvious type of person that can participate on open source because at the end of the day, most open source communities are software-based, right? But by no means, code is the only thing that makes an application or a software. Una Kravets, who is a great open source designer, she says that the diversity is what can take open source from where it is to where it could be. And she's not only talking about diversity of mindsets like designers and developers, but also diversity of genders, of colors, cultures. Any one of them alone will produce something worse than all of them together. And there are actually numbers and statistics that shows that the most successful communities are also the more diverse ones. Designers are critical for a good open source community. They will take a unique point of view, right? They will defend the users that cannot participate on a community, since mostly the contributors are also users of the community, of the product or the project. They will have a unique point of view, and they will make sure that every decision that the community makes has their users in mind. Also, writers are super important, right? Because let's be honest, we are really, really bad writers, especially like designers and probably developers. We are all are, right? And if you don't believe me, just go to any open source project, read the documentation, and you'll probably see what I mean. And writing is really, really hard, right? But if you don't write good things and if you don't communicate correctly in an environment where we all participate in probably not our first language, then the community will probably fail. And documentation, it's never up to date, right? And eventually I'm going to show you how documentation is probably a really good first step to introduce you to any open source community. And sometimes writers become stars of their communities. For example, my friend Geertjan, he's from the Netherlands, and he was a technical writer for the NetBeans community. With his documentation and getting started articles, he guided thousands of developers to use the NetBeans project. And eventually he became the most acclaimed person of the community without ever writing a single line of code. And remember that without good communication, there is no community. And what we write can be the difference between someone feeling welcome or someone feeling rejected from our projects. There is also work for people that don't want to code, right? Developers that don't want to code. And there is administrative work like reviewing issues or reviewing PRs, tagging issues, going to chats and making like things work under the hood. For example, in Bootstrap, we have a guy from Belgium, and he's always reviewing PRs. And then there is another person from France that he's always tagging issues and making sure that we are triaging them correctly. And they are vital for the community to be alive. So I hope that by now I convince you that you all have a place on an open source community. So let's talk a little bit about working for free, right? Why am I recommending you to spend your time in a place where you will be vulnerable, working alongside completely strangers and getting not payment in exchange? So open source is, before anything, an act of love. It's a donation that you're giving back to the industry. And on one hand, you're giving it that, and you're donating your time, and open source gives you some things back. Probably the most important thing that we have as professionals is our connections, right? Our network. And not all of us live in a place where it's a hub of the technology. Even though I'm from Buenos Aires, and Buenos Aires have a really active community, Buenos Aires is just not San Francisco, right? And some people don't have either the time or the energy to go to meetups or go to events. I mean, I have 3 kids. It's really hard for me to leave them during the weekends and go to a meetup. But open source opened the doors to work alongside a huge pool of really interesting and really smart people across the world. And you don't have to go through universities, like super fancy universities, or I don't know, like many interviews to get there and to work with these people. You can just like go there and work with them. And remember that almost without exception, all the superstars of our industry, the people that we admire and follow, they are all working on open source. So if you want to learn with them, if you want to criticize their work, or if you want them to criticize your work, you can just go there and do it, right? The doors are completely open. The other thing you can do is show what you know, right? So even though getting a job should not be your main goal while you participate on open source, there are countless cases where people got jobs while participating on open source. So by doing that, you don't have to go through interviews to show what you know, right? For example, my friend Daniel Pasos, he didn't knew English, and English is a requirement to work at Red Hat. But he could show what he knew without even going through any requisite or any interview. The other good thing is that you can know what people are going to be working with you before accepting a job, right? So no surprises there. I mean, if you want to work, let's say at Red Hat, and you know that you want to work with the Drools team, you can go and work with them for a little bit and see how they are and how they interact with you. You also can play with the bleeding edge technology at a personal level, so it's really hard to find the same scale in a personal project or in a hackathon. So it's super fun to work on the open source overall. And finally, and mainly like the most important thing is that it's addictive. And it's really hard for me to explain the feeling that you get once you see your name attached to an open source project, and that feeling creates like positive feedback loop that makes you want more of that. My first contribution to Bootstrap was 6 letters, right? There was missing a default flag on a SAS variables. And when that was merged and I saw my name there within the project, and I saw that those 7 letters were going to impact so many projects across the world, it made me like want to give more, right? I mean, who has ever used Bootstrap in any project here? Right, so you two are using my 7 letters for your projects. So hopefully I show you that there are places for everyone on communities, and also what you get back from participating on open source. So now let's talk about how to find a community. Now, my advice is to look for the things that you like and you use. So think to yourself, like, what are the things that you would like to solve? And probably there are many people that want to solve the exact same problem that they are getting together to do it. So, for example, if you are like me and you are weirdos and you like CSS, there are places like Bulma, Bootstrap, Tachyons, Foundation, or design systems like Patternfly, the Salesforce design system that you can go and participate. I chose Bootstrap not only because I wouldn't be able to find any other larger CSS code base with most impact than Bootstrap, but also because at the time I was working in a project that had as a dependency Bootstrap. So when I saw something that I wanted to add, or when I saw something broken, I would just contribute it upstream, and then my contributions would be useful for other people. Now, if you like JavaScript and you're using a project based on React, then you can probably contribute to React. Or if you are a Java developer and you use Spring, you can probably go and contribute to Spring, right? There are also places where you can look for projects. GitHub has a really good explorer. And then there is a project called Triage, where you can type the language you want to contribute, and you will get different issues that have relations to the language that you want to contribute. But it really doesn't matter where you want to contribute. There are 3 things to keep in mind as you do it. Brian Litham, who is a really good friend of mine and a large open source contributor, he once told me that contributing to open source is like working within a fishbowl. Everything you do is going to be transparent, it's going to be registered, and it's going to be visible, right? So that will get you in a place where you're going to be vulnerable. But a good open source community will take care of you. So once you choose a community, read the code of conduct. And if you feel disrespected, that's not something you should bear. So if the community doesn't act swiftly, it's probably a place that doesn't deserve you. Now, having said that, you should probably build a thick skin, because it's a place where you're going to be criticized and you're going to be criticizing others. That's why having respect as you do it is super important. And the other thing that you should think about is having really good communication. You're going to be working alongside people from different cultures where rarely English is going to be their first language. Some cultures, they think that being respectful is getting direct criticism to you. And some others will just not tolerate that, right? And I can see that in Bootstrap. We have a contributor from the Netherlands, and when he talked with another one who is from Japan, you get a really interesting interaction. The guy from the Netherlands, he's really direct and really brutal on his criticisms, and the other one, he talks around things. But since they both want the best for the project, they are humble, they are positive, then the result is always really, really good. And the last thing you should take in consideration is having trust, right? You will see as you start contributing that people usually trust in each other in the open source communities, and that generates a really nice bond, and it allows you to show what you are capable of. Now, there is a thing about trust, which is that you should build it. So start always with really small contributions, and we're going to talk about this later, but it is critical, right? You should build your trust with small contributions. So by now, you should probably know how to find a community. And let's talk about the tools you need to contribute to open source. And this is probably going to be super basic for you all, right? You need basically 3 things: to know Git, to know your way around the command line, and to know how to use a communication channel. And when I say the command line, I say a very basic and fundamental use of the command line. I mean, I can do it, and I'm really not an expert in the command line at all. So if you can run npm or maven or any of the commands and you can follow instructions, you probably can work on any open source project. There is a really good book written by Remy Sharp that is an introduction to the command line. If you don't know how to use it, I recommend this book highly. Now, Git is the language of open source. And there are many Git visual and desktop clients, like I know Git Kraken, GitHub Desktop. I recommend you skip them and just use how to use a Git on the command line. Is probably a steeper learning curve, but you're going to get better results. Almost every single open source project is have in GitHub, so you also need a GitHub account and know your way around GitHub. If you don't know Git, there is a really good resource, try.github.io. It will give you cheat sheets and other learning places. Even if you know Git, I recommend you checking them out. There are like some hidden gems there to improve your Git game. And finally, every single community has a communication channel. Usually there is a mailing list. For example, in Bootstrap, we have Slack channel for users. Then we have discussions of code in GitHub issues and PRs. And then Stack Overflow for discussions among implementations. So the hardest part is done, right? You know exactly how to choose a community. You know how to participate. So let's talk about how to get your first steps. And if you can remember one thing about this talk, remember this. Start with small contributions. The smallest they are, the better. Because at the end of the day, one contribution is going to value one commit. And it doesn't really matter if the commit is one change of a semicolon or if it's a huge feature. I'm going to show you why that's really important, right? The other reason is that when you send a really large contribution and you're not well known in the community, probably, me as a maintainer, I will have to download it and test it carefully. So it will go to the end of my line of things to do. And while if you send something really simple and really small, I will just merge it and then move on. Now, think about the things that nobody wants to do, right? For example, documentation. Documentation is a great place to start. Go to any open source project, read through like how to contribute, try to follow the instructions. You will for sure fail at some point. So just like change the instructions with what you learn and send it to your community. Those are great way to start. Other things are tests, right? Who likes to write tests? Nobody writes tests. So who wants to improving the deploying pipeline or things like that, right? Anything that nobody wants to do, they are really, really good places to start. Now, some communities have tags on their issues, mark help wanted or good first issue. And now during October, there is Hacktoberfest. So if you don't know what Hacktoberfest is, it's basically a project led by DigitalOcean. So some communities have like this first good issue or tags like that. So if you make 4 contributions to open source during October, they will ship you a t-shirt. It's just a nice gift to get. But those PRs can be anything. It can be documentation, it can be whatever you want, as long as you participate on open source. There are also less shiny but important things to do, like administrative work on the communities. So if you can go and read issues or help reviewing PRs or help users in the community, that's super, super important for any community. And of course, you can write code, right? And as you write code, sometimes you're going to fail and you're going to screw up. And that's okay. One of my first contributions to Bootstrap was changing the rounded corners of a bottom from 10 ems to 50%, right? And what it does is instead of making a peel which has rounded corners at the end, it makes an oval shape. And I should know, right? It's basic CSS, right? But I didn't test it. I wrote it and sent the PR. Now, Mark Otto, who is the creator of Bootstrap, he's also the director of design in GitHub. Instead of telling me, go and learn CSS and then come back and talk to us, he created a code pen for me to learn what was wrong there. And that respect to my time and my effort as a contributor is something I like to mimic, right? And as you make mistakes, you will see how there are many, many kind people that will help you on the way to becoming a better developer. So now that you know how to do your first steps, let's talk about leveling up. And I would like to tell you a secret. there is no one participating in open source. No one. I mean, probably here in the EclipseCon, you will see that people are super contributors and they are all over the place, but those are rare, right? Nobody's working on open source. And I'm going to show you how, by making small commits, you can participate in the largest projects of the world, and you can become a contributor to those projects. So let me just show you a little demo here. So who here is a Java developer? Yeah, most of you, right? So who knows RX Java, Reactive Java? Yeah, right. So it's a very popular project, right? It's used by thousands of projects. So it's currently being developed by 239 developers. And if you scroll down the list of the most popular contributors, you will see that with just one commit, you become a top 100 contributor to that community. And that guy there, he made like 1 + 1 - So he deleted one thing and he added one. This one here, he didn't even delete anything. He just added one, right? It's probably a period missing on the documentation. I don't know. It's a really, really tiny contribution. But that contribution made him access the top 100 contributors of this project. And I mean, now I became a manager 6 months ago. And as a manager, as I'm hiring, if I see a developer that has contributed, tells me that he has contributed to an open source community, it will caught my attention, even though I will eventually go and see what he has done, right? But that doesn't really matter. I mean, eventually you will stand out over other people. If you scroll up, like if you make 2 contributions, you will like be higher. If you make 4 contributions, you are going to be top 50. I think in my life I made like 40 contributions to Bootstrap, and I'm a core contributor. But I do lots of administrative work too on the community. But you will see how things like Spring Boot, right? Who uses Spring Boot? Right. So Spring Boot is being developed by I move it there, but it's around like 400 developers. And if you go down, if you make 2 contributions to Spring Boot, you're going to be top 100 developer of Spring Boot. And for example, here he deleted 3 characters, right, in his life. Same happened with, Waba is even smaller. It's like 100 and something contributors. And again, like if you'd make 2 contributions are going to be top 5. If you're going to 50, and then it becomes at the end like exponential, because those are people are paid to contribute on those projects. But other than the top 20, all of them, it's really, really simple to get into this project. There is a testing tool for Java called Mockito. I don't know if you know it. There is no one really contributing to this project. If you make 2 contributions, you are top 10. Then like same thing with Hadoop, right? So the open source world is completely open for anyone to participate. We are kind of desperate for people to do it. And everything you do has lots of value. And you don't even need to know the language, right? I'm not a developer. I don't know how to write basically anything that is not CSS and HTML. Now, since I wanted my T-shirt for Oktoberfest, I went to some communities and I just added this, right? Like before installing, doing the contributions, you need to install MongoDB and Node. And I mean, I knew that because I tried to run the getting started and I couldn't run it. So that's a really good contribution. This is another one, right? This is Docusaurus is the documentation project for Facebook. So it's what's running the documentation of React, for example. And as I was running the contribution guidelines, I noticed that I couldn't do it. So I just changed it, right? You need to run like yarn start v1, right? And I knew this because I failed at doing it. So probably if you run any project, you're going to fail because every documentation is outdated, right? Projects go on, but documentation doesn't follow through. So I went in, I made 4 contributions in really simple projects. There is a period that is missing in another place. I changed it, and now I'm getting the T-shirt next month. There you go. Right. Oops. Let's do this. Okay. So sometimes when I show this, I hear people saying that they don't have time. And that's a valid point, right? We don't have time. But I propose you to block half an hour every week on your calendar. And that's a half an hour between meetings, that half an hour that you go for a coffee or you do nothing, and just dedicate that half an hour to see or participate in one open source project. And that half an hour might be the half an hour that completely changed your career as it did change mine. I remember that every single star in the industry has worked on open source or is still working on open source. So maybe the next superstar of our industry is sitting here in this room, right? We just don't know. So I invite you to participate on open source and become like the people that create the path for the future. So thank you very much. Now, if you want to read really more about this, I wrote an article for Elisa Part. It basically says the same as I talk about in the article.